The snow had stopped falling when Noelle pushed open the cabin door. The forest was silent, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm buries everything. She wasn't supposed to be outside. Mama said the cold could steal your breath, but Noelle had seen something dark near the tree line, something that didn't belong. She trudged through the drift, her boots disappearing with each step. Then she saw it, a hand, sticking up from the snow like a frozen branch. Noelle stopped, crouched down, scraped away the ice with her mittened hands until she saw the gold ring on one finger, thick, heavy, with a symbol carved into it. The kind of ring that catches moonlight. The kind that costs more than her mama's sewing machine, more than their whole cabin, maybe more than everything they owned put together. She dug faster. A face appeared beneath the white. A man, huge. His jaw was square and dark with stubble, his coat torn and stained red near the shoulder. Snow clung to his eyelashes. His skin had gone the color of winter sky. Noelle touched his cheek, cold as stone. "Mama," she screamed, her voice swallowed by the trees. "Mama, I found a giant. He's sleeping in the snow." Inside the cabin, Anya dropped the needle she'd been threading. She grabbed her shawl and ran. When she reached her daughter, she froze. The man was massive, easily twice her weight, shoulders like an ox, hands that could snap wood without effort. His suit was ruined but expensive, the kind only city men wore. The kind worn by people who didn't end up frozen in the woods by accident. Noelle stepped back, Anya whispered. "But Mama, he'll die if we leave him." Anya knew that. She also knew that men like this, men with gold rings and bullet holes, brought trouble with them like shadows. But her daughter was already pulling at his arm, trying to wake him, and Anya had spent too many nights stitching clothes for cruel men to let one freeze to death in front of her child. She looked at the sled leaning against the cabin wall. It was built for hauling firewood, not bodies, but it would have to do. "Help me," she said quietly. The giant was heavier than anything Noelle had ever tried to move. Mama pulled from the front of the sled, leaning her whole body into the rope. Noelle pushed from behind, her small hands barely making a dent against the man's shoulder. The cabin was only 30 feet away, but it felt like miles. Every few steps they had to stop. Mama's breath came in sharp gasps, white clouds in the frozen air. "Why is he so big?" Noelle asked, shoving again with all her might. "I don't know, sweetheart, keep pushing." They got him through the door just as the sky began to darken. Inside, the fire had burned down to embers. Anya stoked it back to life while Noelle stood guard over the giant, watching his chest to make sure it still moved up and down. It did, barely. "Is he going to wake up, Mama?" "I don't know." Anya knelt beside him, scissors in hand. She cut away his coat. The fabric was soaked through, heavy with snow and blood. Underneath, his shirt was the kind of white that came from expensive laundries, now ruined. She peeled it back carefully. There was a gash across his ribs, shallow but angry. It wasn't sharp like a knife, more like a bullet had grazed his side. A bruise spread across his chest like spilled ink. His knuckles were split open, and there was dried blood at his temple where something, or someone, had hit him hard. Noelle crouched beside his face. She used the corner of her sleeve to wipe the snow from his eyebrows, his cheekbones, the dark stubble along his jaw. He had a scar that ran from his ear to his chin, pale and old. His nose looked like it had been broken before, maybe more than once. He should have looked scary. Mama said men this big were always dangerous, that you could see it in their eyes even when they smiled. But his eyes were closed, and with his face turned toward the firelight, covered in melting snow, he didn't look dangerous at all. He looked lonely. "Mama," Noelle whispered, "do you think anyone's looking for him?" Anya paused, her hands hovering over the bandage she was tying. She glanced at the gold ring still on his finger, at the quality of his ruined clothes, at the way his body was built like a man who'd spent his life fighting. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think someone is." Good people or bad people? Anya didn't answer. She finished wrapping his ribs and pulled a quilt over him, one she'd sewn herself from scraps, patches of old dresses and worn shirts stitched together over long winter nights. It barely covered his chest. Noelle sat cross-legged beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. It was like touching a mountain. "Don't worry, giant," she whispered. "We'll keep you safe until you wake up." Outside, the wind picked up. Snow began to fall again, covering their tracks, burying the place where they'd found him. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled. The giant's breathing deepened just a little. And in the darkness beyond the trees, headlights moved slowly along the frozen road, searching. Anya couldn't sleep. She sat at the table with a half-finished coat spread before her, needle in hand, but her eyes kept drifting to the giant by the fire. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm now, the color slowly returning to his face. That was good. That meant he'd live. That was also terrifying. She spent the last hour examining what was left of his clothes. The coat she'd cut away was wool, real wool, not the synthetic blend she stitched into jackets for the market. The label inside was foreign, hand-sewn, the kind of craftsmanship that didn't exist anymore except in cities she'd never see. Even ruined, even blood-stained and torn, that coat was worth more than she made in 6 months. The shirt had been custom-tailored. She could tell by the way the seams sat, the quality of the stitching at the collar. The shoes, Italian leather, she thought, were scuffed and waterlogged but probably cost more than a year of her firewood. And the ring, that gold ring with its carved symbol. Anya had seen marks like that before, on the lapels of the men who came to collect her taxes, on the sides of black cars that rolled through town once a month, on the envelopes that arrived with payment for the uniform she sewed, uniforms she wasn't supposed to ask questions about. Her hands trembled as she pushed the needle through fabric. Noelle was curled up on the floor beside the giant, using his shoulder as a pillow. Anya had tried to move her to the bed, but she'd refused. "I have to make sure he doesn't get cold again," she'd said, so serious it broke Anya's heart. The fire popped. A log shifted and sent sparks up the chimney. The giant stirred. Anya went still, needle suspended mid-stitch. His head turned slightly toward the warmth. His brow furrowed like he was dreaming something dark. Then his breathing evened out again and he was quiet. Anya exhaled. She looked at her daughter, so small next to him, so trusting, and felt the weight of what they'd done settle over her like snow. They'd brought a stranger into their home, a dangerous stranger, a man who wore wealth like armor and had clearly been left to die for a reason. But what else could they have done? Let him freeze. Let Noelle watch a man die in the snow while they did nothing. She pressed her palms to her eyes. The sewing could wait. She needed to think. If he woke up, what would she say? If he was one of them, one of the men whose money paid for her bread, whose violence kept her awake at night, what would he do to them for seeing him weak? And if someone came looking for him, would they believe she'd only been trying to help? Anya reached for the poker and adjusted the fire, adding another log even though they were running low. The cold was the enemy she knew. The cold she could fight. The giant shifted again. This time his hand moved, just slightly, fingers curling against the floor like he was reaching for something that wasn't there. Noelle murmured in her sleep and pressed closer to him. Anya picked up her needle and kept stitching because that's what she always did. Work until the fear got smaller. Work until morning came. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire burned. And between them, the sleeping giant dreamed of gunfire and ice. Caesar was drowning. No, not drowning. Freezing. The cold had teeth, biting through his skin into his bones, dragging him down into something darker than sleep. He tried to open his eyes, but his body wouldn't obey. Tried to move his hand, but it was made of lead. Then the cold shifted, became heat, fire. His chest burned where the bullet had grazed him, his ribs screamed with every breath, and suddenly he wasn't in the snow anymore. He was in the car. Marcus was driving, Marcus who'd been with him for 12 years, Marcus who'd earned his place at the table with blood and loyalty, Marcus whose daughter Caesar had sent to university, whose mother he'd paid to bury when cancer took her. "Pull over up here," Caesar had said. "I need to make a call." But Marcus hadn't pulled over. The headlights behind them were getting closer. 2 cars, coming fast. Caesar had reached for his phone, but Marcus's hand shot out and knocked it from his grip. "Marcus, I'm sorry, boss." That's when Caesar saw the gun. Not pointed at him, pointed at the road. Marcus fired twice through the windshield, jerking the wheel hard to the right. The car went sideways, tires screaming, and then they were airborne, just for a second, just long enough for Caesar to see Marcus's face in the rearview mirror. He wasn't sorry at all. They hit the embankment, and the world turned to glass and metal and blood. Caesar felt his ribs crack against the seatbelt, felt his head slam into something hard, felt the cold rush in as the door gave way and the snow swallowed him whole. He'd crawled. He remembered that part. Crawled away from the wreck while voices shouted behind him, while Marcus yelled orders to find the body, make sure he was dead. Caesar had made it to the trees. Then the cold had taken him. Now in the fever dream, Marcus was standing over him, gun raised, smiling. Nothing personal, Titan, just business. The shot rang out. Caesar's eyes snapped open. He gasped, choking on air that felt too hot, too thick. His hand shot out, grabbing for something, a weapon, a throat, anything, and found only rough wood and empty space. "Izzy, you're safe." A woman's voice, soft but firm. Hands pressed against his shoulder, holding him down. Not that she could have stopped him if he'd really wanted to move, but the touch was enough to anchor him. Caesar blinked. The shapes around him slowly came into focus. A cabin, small, dark except for firelight. The ceiling was low, wooden beams crossed overhead. The air smelled like pine and smoke and something cooking. The woman kneeling beside him had dark hair pulled back in a braid, lines of exhaustion around her eyes. She held a damp cloth in one hand. Her other hand stayed on his shoulder, steady despite the fear he could see in her face. "Where?" His voice came out like gravel. He tried again. "Where am I?" "My home," she said quietly. "My daughter found you in the snow. You've been unconscious for 2 days." 2 days? Marcus would think he was dead. That was good. That bought him time. Caesar tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain exploded through his ribs, white-hot and sharp. He fell back with a grunt. "Don't move," the woman said. "You're hurt badly." He looked down. Someone had bandaged his chest, wrapped his ribs tight. His expensive suit was gone, replaced with a blanket that smelled like cedar and age. A small face appeared beside the woman. A girl, maybe 7 or 8, with wide eyes and blonde hair in 2 braids. "You're awake," she whispered like it was a secret. "I knew you would be. Giants always wake up." Caesar stared at her, at this child who looked at him without fear, without calculation, who smiled like she'd saved a wounded bird instead of dragging home a monster. "Thank you," he heard himself say. Outside, somewhere in the distance, an engine rumbled past on the road. The woman's hand tightened on his shoulder, and Caesar realized that being alive meant Marcus was still looking. Caesar learned to lie still. It wasn't hard. His body felt like it had been broken and badly reassembled. Every breath was a negotiation with his ribs, but he'd survived worse. He'd survived this. What he needed now was information. So he kept his breathing slow and watched through half-closed eyes as the woman, Anya, the girl had called her, moved around the cabin in the hours after dark. She put the child to bed first, tucking her in with a gentleness that made something in Caesar's chest tighten. Then she returned to the table, lit 2 candles despite the way she frowned at them like they were expensive, and pulled out a wooden box filled with thread and fabric. Cesar watched her work. She was fast, efficient. Her hands moved with the kind of precision that came from years of repetition. She'd measure, cut, pin, stitch, all without pausing, without wasting a single motion. A coat took shape under her fingers, dark blue fabric with black trim. It was the trim that made Cesar go cold. He knew that pattern, gold thread stitched into a specific design along the collar and cuffs. The Volkov family crest, simplified, stylized. The mark his organization used on their security personnel, the street-level enforcers who collected debts and kept order in the territories he controlled. She was sewing uniforms for his men. Cesar kept his breathing steady, but his mind was racing. How many did she make? Who paid her? And more importantly, why was she doing it here alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere? The answer came an hour later when she paused to flex her fingers. She reached for a ledger, small and worn, and opened it to a page filled with numbers. Her lips moved as she added them up. Then she pressed her hand to her mouth and closed her eyes. Cesar had seen that gesture before, on the faces of people who owed him money, on the families of men who'd borrowed and couldn't pay back. She was in debt. To him, to his organization. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so bitter. She went back to sewing. Midnight came and went. The candles burned lower. Her shoulders hunched forward and she had to stop twice to rub her eyes, but she didn't quit. At some point the girl stirred in her bed. "Mama." "I'm here, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." "You should sleep too." "Soon. I just need to finish this coat." The girl didn't argue. She curled back into her blanket, and within minutes her breathing evened out. Anya kept stitching. Cesar thought about the men who wore these uniforms. He thought about the quotas he'd set, the territories he'd assigned, the orders he'd given from behind a desk in a building with marble floors and bulletproof glass. He told Marcus to maximize revenue in the outer districts. He'd approved the expansion into rural areas because the numbers made sense. He never asked what maximizing revenue actually looked like. Now he was watching it. A woman sewing until her hands cramped because someone wearing his crest had come to her door and told her she owed more than she could ever pay. Someone had turned her skill into a trap, her home into a prison. And she'd still dragged him out of the snow. The candles guttered. It had to be past 3 in the morning. Anya finally set down the needle and pressed her palms against the table, head bowed, shoulders shaking with exhaustion or tears or both. Then she stood, folded the finished coat, and added it to a stack of 5 others. 6 coats, probably a week's worth of work, probably not enough to cover whatever interest they were charging her. She blew out the candles and moved to the corner where she slept, not a bed, just a thin mattress on the floor. She didn't even take off her shawl before she lay down. Cesar closed his eyes fully. In the darkness, he could still see Marcus's face, could still hear him say, "Nothing personal, just business." This was business too. This cabin, this woman, this debt. This was his business. And for the first time in 12 years, Cesar felt something worse than the bullet wound in his side. He felt ashamed. The sound of boots on the porch came 3 days later. Cesar was awake before the first knock. He sat up slowly, every muscle coiled tight, and watched as Anya moved toward the door. "Don't," he said quietly. But she was already opening it. A young man stood there, maybe 25, wearing a leather jacket that was too nice for collection work in the middle of nowhere. He had a cigarette behind his ear and didn't bother hiding the gun bulge under his arm. "Morning, Anya. Got something for me." "It's not ready yet," Anya said, her voice tight. "You said I had until Friday." Plans changed. Boss wants his cut early. He stepped inside without invitation. Holiday surcharge. Cesar kept still, half hidden by the shadows near the fireplace. but his eyes tracked every movement. "That wasn't part of the agreement," Anya said. "It is now." The man walked past her, looking around the cabin like he owned it. His gaze swept over the neat stacks of firewood visible through the window, the fresh repairs to the roof, the signs that someone had been taking care of things. "You've been holding out on us, Anya." "No, I don't have the money yet. I can give you 3 of the coats now and—" "I don't want coats, I want cash." "I don't have cash, you know I don't." The man sighed like she was being unreasonable. He walked to the mantel and picked up a small wooden bird, something Noelle had carved, and turned it over in his hands. That's when Cesar saw it. On the man's lapel, stitched in gold thread, was the Volkov family crest. His crest. "Nice place," the man said. "Be a shame if something happened to it." Cesar's jaw tightened. "Please," Anya whispered. "Just give me until Friday. I'll have everything. I'll even add an extra coat." "You don't get it, do you?" The man stepped closer to her. "There's always another payment, always another fee. You're gonna keep paying until—" "Mama!" Noelle stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She froze when she saw the stranger. The man glanced at her and smiled. It wasn't kind. "Well, hey there, sweetheart." "Noelle, go back to bed," Anya said quickly. But Noelle didn't move. She looked at her mother's face, at the fear there, and her small hands curled into fists. The man laughed, "Teaching her to be tough, that's cute." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and tossed it on the table. "New terms, double rate starting next month." "Double?" Anya's voice cracked. "I can't." "Then figure something out." He headed for the door, then paused and looked back at Noelle. "Pretty kid. Be a shame if she had to grow up somewhere else." The door slammed. Anya stood frozen. Noelle ran to her and wrapped her arms around her waist. "It's okay, Mama. We'll be okay." Cesar stared at the envelope on the table, at the crest on the coat Anya had been sewing, at the little girl trying to comfort her mother. He built an empire on fear and told himself it was clean, that it was business, that he only targeted people who understood the game. But this was his game, his crest, his name. His monster. Cesar opened his eyes fully and looked at his hands. They were strong again, ready. And soon, Marcus would learn what happened when you woke a sleeping giant. It took Cesar 3 days to stand without falling. He did it at night, when Anya and Noelle were asleep. Pushed himself up from the floor, gritting his teeth against the fire in his ribs, and stood there swaying until his legs remembered what they were supposed to do. The 4th night he took 5 steps. The 5th night he made it across the cabin and back. By the end of the week, he could move without wanting to scream. Anya noticed, of course. She was too careful not to, but she didn't say anything, just watched him with those tired, cautious eyes while she worked. Cesar caught her looking sometimes, trying to figure out who he was, what he'd do when he was strong enough to leave. Noelle, on the other hand, treated his recovery like it was the most natural thing in the world. She'd sit beside him while he stretched, chattering about birds or stories. She'd bring him water without being asked. "Look, Mama, the giant can touch his toes now." Cesar hadn't touched his toes in 20 years, but he didn't correct her. He started doing push-ups when they went to bed. Slow at first, 10 nearly killed him, but muscle had memory. By the end of the 2nd week, he could do 50 without stopping. He did squats holding the iron kettle, planks until his arms shook. He forced his body to remember what it was before the cold and the bullet had tried to take it from him. And he watched. He watched Anya sew until her fingers bled, watched her ration the food so Noelle always had enough, watched her stare out the window with shoulders carrying weight that had nothing to do with fabric. The woodpile was getting low, maybe 2 weeks left if they were careful. Anya kept glancing at it with the same look she gave the ledger. Another problem, another cost. On the 15th day, Anya took Noelle to the market. Caesar waited until they were out of sight. Then he stood, rolled his shoulders, and walked outside. The axe was leaning against the shed, blade dull from use. Caesar grabbed a log and set it on the block. The first swing sent pain shooting through his ribs. The second was easier. By the third, he'd found his rhythm. He worked in silence, just the crack of splitting wood and his breath in white clouds. His side screamed at him to stop. He didn't stop. Log after log split clean. He stacked them against the wall the way his father had taught him. Keep the wood dry, keep it accessible, keep your family warm. An hour passed, maybe two. When he finished, there was enough wood to last through winter and into spring. His hands were blistered, his ribs on fire, but the dwindling pile was now overflowing. He put the axe back exactly where he'd found it and went inside. When Anya and Noelle returned, Noelle saw it first. "Mama, where did all the wood come from?" Anya stared at the stacks. Her eyes moved to Caesar, sitting by the fire, hands hidden under his blanket. She didn't ask, but her eyes said everything. That night she made extra stew. She set the bowl in front of him without a word, but her hand lingered on his shoulder, just long enough to say thank you. Noelle climbed into his lap after dinner, half asleep. "You're getting stronger," she murmured. "Soon you'll be able to carry mountains." Caesar looked down at this tiny girl who'd saved a monster and called him a giant. "Maybe not mountains," he said quietly. But across the cabin, Anya caught his eye and something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet. But maybe the beginning of. The knock came at midnight. Not a polite knock, the kind that said open up or we're coming through anyway. Caesar was awake instantly, every sense sharpening. Anya was already moving toward the door, pulling her shawl tight. "Don't answer it," Caesar said quietly. But she was already opening it. 3 men stood on the porch, city men, expensive coats, Marcus's men. The one in front had a scar through his eyebrow. Victor. Caesar recognized him from the night before the ambush. "We're looking for someone," Victor said, pushing inside without invitation. "Big guy, probably hurt." "I don't know what you're talking about," Anya said. Victor's eyes swept the cabin, the fresh woodpile, the repairs, the signs someone had been helping. "You've been busy." He picked up one of the coats from the table. The Volkov crest gleamed. "Shame you've been holding out." "I haven't. We've checked every cabin for 50 miles, but we missed this place. Too isolated." He turned to face her. "Makes me think someone wanted to stay hidden." "There's no one here." "No," Victor walked toward the sleeping area. Ask your daughter." Anya tried to block him. Victor shoved her aside. "Mama," Noelle sat up frightened. Victor crouched beside her bed. "Has anyone else been staying here, sweetheart?" A big man. She said no. Caesar stepped from the shadows. "Get away from her." Victor spun. His eyes went wide. "Boss." "You're alive," Victor breathed. Then his face hardened. "Marcus said." "Marcus lied." Caesar moved forward. The cabin felt smaller with each step. "And you believed him." Victor's hand went to his jacket. The other 2 men flanked him. One moved between Caesar and Noelle. "Marcus is in charge now," Victor said. "You've been gone 2 weeks. Everyone thinks you're dead." "Then I guess they'll be surprised." Victor drew his gun. Caesar was faster. He grabbed Victor's wrist and twisted. Bone cracked. Victor screamed. The man near Noelle drew. Caesar threw Victor into him. They crashed down together. The third man raised his weapon. Anya's kettle caught him in the temple. He dropped. "Silence." Victor was on the floor, cradling his wrist, gasping. Caesar picked up the gun and ejected the magazine. He crouched down to Victor's level. "Go back to Marcus. Tell him I'm alive. And if he sends anyone else to this cabin, if he even thinks about this woman or her daughter, I'll finish what I should have done years ago." Victor nodded frantically. "And Victor, tell him the Titan is awake." Caesar hauled him up and shoved him out the door. He dragged the other two onto the porch after him. When he turned back, Anya was holding Noelle, both shaking. "I'm sorry," Caesar said. "I brought this to your door." Anya stared at him, at the man who just broken bones with his bare hands, at the Titan. "Who are you?" Caesar looked at the Volkov crest on the coat, at the ledger filled with debt, at everything he'd built without looking at what it actually did. "Someone who's been asleep too long." Outside, an engine started. Taillights vanished into the trees. The real fight was about to begin. Caesar waited until dawn. He sat at Anya's table, 3 confiscated guns laid out in front of him, Victor's phone, and an address written in shaky handwriting, given up after Caesar explained what would happen if Victor didn't cooperate. Anya hadn't slept. She watched him from the corner, Noelle curled in her lap. "You're going after them," she said. "Yes. They'll kill you. They'll try." He loaded one of the pistols, the clicks loud in the quiet cabin. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the chamber, testing the weight, muscle memory from a life he'd almost forgotten. "Why risk it?" Anya whispered. "You could just leave, disappear." Caesar looked at her. At the exhaustion in her face, the calluses on her fingers, the way she held her daughter like she was the only thing worth protecting. "Because they came to your door," he said. "Because I built the machine that's been grinding you down, and I didn't even know your name." He stood, tucking the guns into his belt. "I'm not coming back until it's finished." Noelle lifted her head. "Will you be okay, giant?" Caesar knelt down. "I'll be okay, and when this is over, no one ever going to ask your mama for money again, I promise." He left before they could respond. The warehouse was 15 miles out. Concrete and rust, 2 guards at the gate wearing his crest on their jackets. They weren't expecting trouble. The Titan was dead. This was just another day. Caesar took them both down without a sound and walked inside. Marcus was at a desk in the back, phone to his ear, laughing. 8 men total in the warehouse, most armed. Caesar had been outnumbered before. He stepped into the light. "Evening, Marcus." The room went silent. Marcus's face cycled through shock, fear, then calculation. His hand moved toward his gun. "I wouldn't," Caesar said. Marcus forced a smile. "Boss, Jesus, we thought you were dead. In the snow, where you left me." The smile cracked. "I don't know what. You shot through the windshield, ran us off the road, told your men to make sure I was dead." Caesar walked forward slowly. "Did you practice that speech about me being a liability?" Marcus stood. The other men had hands on weapons now, watching both bosses. "You were getting soft," Marcus said. "All those rules about civilians. You were leaving money on the table." "Money?" Caesar laughed, bitter. "You tried to kill me over money." "I tried to kill you because you forgot what we are. Criminals. And criminals who go soft end up dead anyway." Caesar reached the desk. "You're right, I did go soft. I built an empire and never checked what it was doing. I let people like you operate in my name." He leaned forward. "But I'm awake now." Marcus grabbed for his gun. Caesar was faster. He slammed Marcus down against the desk, pistol pressed to his temple. The other men raised their weapons. "Anyone moves, he dies. Then you die, so let's stay still." No one moved. Caesar pulled out Victor's phone and hit record. "Now, Marcus, you're going to confess. Every protection racket, every falsified debt, every person you've squeezed, all of it." It took 20 minutes. When it was done, Caesar sent the recording to his lawyer, his accountant, and a journalist. Then he looked at the men around the warehouse. "Leave now, or we settle this the old way." 6 ran, 2 stayed. When it was over, Caesar called the FBI. "My name is Caesar Volkov. I'm at," he gave the address. "With $8 million in cash, stolen merchandise, and a recorded confession, I'll be here when you arrive." Marcus stared at him from the floor, hands zip-tied. "You're turning yourself in." "No, I'm turning you in. I'm done, Marcus, done with the Empire." Caesar heard sirens in the distance. He walked out, climbed into his truck, and drove back toward the cabin. He had one more promise to keep. The cabin looked the same when Caesar returned. He parked in the trees and walked the last 100 yards. Dawn was breaking, painting the snow pink and gold. Smoke rose from the chimney, Anya keeping the fire going. He knocked softly. The door opened a crack. Anya stood there with the iron kettle, face pale and exhausted. When she saw him, something cracked in her expression. "You came back." "I said I would." Noelle ran to him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "You're okay. I knew you'd be okay." Caesar rested his hand on her head, gentle as he could manage. "I'm okay." He walked to the table and set down a leather case, documents he'd spent hours arranging while Marcus's world burned. "What is this?" Anya asked. "The deed to this cabin and 50 acres around it. It's in your name now. No one can take it." Anya stared at the paper like it was foreign. "I don't understand." "You own it, free and clear." He pulled out another document. "This is a trust fund for Noelle, enough for university, whatever she wants. It can't be touched until she's 18. Caesar. And this," he pulled out a small black ledger, "is every debt recorded under your name. Every fake surcharge, every inflated payment, every dollar they claimed you owed." He walked to the fireplace and tossed it in. The pages caught immediately, curling and blackening. Anya watched them burn, hand pressed to her mouth. "It's gone," Caesar said. "All of it. The people collecting from you are in federal custody or running. The organization doesn't exist anymore. You're free." Anya sank into a chair, shaking. "Why would you do this?" "Because you saved my life. Because your daughter believed I was a giant instead of a monster. Because you worked yourself to exhaustion paying debts to an empire I built but never looked at." He pulled out a final envelope. Inside was more money than Anya made in 5 years. "For everything they took from you, it's not enough, but it's a start." Anya took it with trembling hands. Tears streamed down her face. "What about you?" "I've got things to settle, people to pay back, wrongs to right." He looked at Noelle. "But I'm not going back to what I was. That empire is dead. I buried it in the snow." "So what will you be?" Caesar thought about the Titan, the boss, the name that made people cross the street. About the man Marcus tried to kill for going soft. About waking up in this cabin and realizing he'd been asleep for years. "Something better," he said. Noelle tugged his sleeve. "Will you come back?" Caesar looked down at this little girl, who dug a giant from the snow and believed he could be good. "Yeah, I'll come back." He walked to the door, then turned. Anya crossed the cabin and wrapped her arms around him. She barely reached his chest, but she held tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for waking up." Caesar returned the embrace carefully. When he stepped outside, the sun was fully up. The snow sparkled. The forest was quiet. He'd been a soldier, a criminal, a boss, a titan. But as he walked away and heard Noelle's laughter through the door, he realized he'd finally become something new. Someone who could sleep at night. 3 months later, he returned carrying groceries, a new coat for Noelle, and expensive fabric for Anya. Because sometimes giants wake up and realize the strongest thing they can do is protect instead of destroy. The Titan was gone. The Guardian had taken his place.